That way. Sorry. And I'd like to know if there are any apologies for absence. Right. Any others? I don't think we need any more. No, thank you. The record of decisions, are you happy that I should sign those as a correct record? Right, I'll do that after the meeting. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. I'd like to make a declaration of mine in respect to my chairmanship and directorship of Medway Development Company for the items that are from 7 to 11. Many of those actually mention them in passing. So I think that that would be proper. And I'm sure that Councillor Golding would wish to declare similarly interest.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Yes, I most certainly do. And I believe we both have a dispensation from the Council of Conduct Committee, so we can vote and speak on issues concerning MDC.
That's right. Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations? Okay. We'll then come to item 4, which is the Council Plan Refresh for 23-24. Adrian, would you like to start on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Leader. This year's Council Plan Refresh is very much a light touch affair. One of the main drivers for that was, as the Council's in a post-pandemic recovery position, the amount of work that was needed to do an in-depth review, we decided would be best put off to next year, where it's proposed to have a more fundamental review, a real dig in, and this will also give us the opportunity to introduce new KPIs to cover things such as climate change and our child-friendly city ambitions. I'd like to thank the Business Support ONS Committee for their comments, which are reported in Supplementary Agenda number 3, along with updated recommendations to reflect the decision to keep the ILAC 7 target at 80% instead of being lowered to 50%, as had previously been recommended by officers. So, Deputy Leader, I'd like to move the recommendations at 3 on page 14 of the Supplementary Agenda number 3, namely 3.1. The Cabinet is asked to note the comments of the Business Support ONS Committee as set out in the addendum report. 3.2, Cabinet is asked to recommend to full Council the adoption of the refreshed Council Plan measures as set out at Appendix 1 to the report, subject to the ILAC 7 target, which is the percentage of children's social care audits graded good or outstanding, remaining at 80% rather than being lowered to 50% as recommended in Appendix 1. And 3.3, Cabinet is asked to note that those Council Plan measures still awaiting a proposed target will be further considered by the corporate management team, and that full Council will be asked to delegate authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with the portfolio holder resources to the final measures. I so move, Deputy Leader.
Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And thanks for the officers to the report. It's interesting to note that in the report, as Councillor Goldman has said, it is a refresh, but there has been at least one measure that's been taken out. The measure hasn't been reported since 2018 because of COVID, and it's no longer available. So we are going to be slightly reducing the number of things that we measure. Just to say that there was some slight deterioration this quarter that we need to be mindful of. So we need to keep our eye on what's going on in the future for the next report. Thank you.
You heard the proposal. Are you all in favour? Thank you. We now come to the final funding formula for mainstream schools and academies. Martin, would you like to lead on this? Councillor Potter?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Leader. So the report outlines the final mainstream funding formula for schools and academies for the years 2023-24. Funding for all schools and academies is provided by central government in the form of the dedicated schools grant and the funding formula is the mechanism for distributing this funding fairly. The Schools Forum is a body made up of local education leaders, and they recommend how school funding will be allocated in Medway. All schools and academies were consulted on changes to the proposed formula, and Cabinet approved the provisional funding formula in December. The final formula was discussed by the Schools Forum on the 11th of January, and they are recommending the implementation of the final formula methodology. The details of this, including the breakdown for different areas and the funding factors, can be found in sections 3.4 to 3.6 of the report. Therefore, Cabinet is asked to approve the recommendations, which is to agree the funding formula and to waive the call-in process, and these recommendations are set out in section 8 of the report. Thank you.
Does that have a seconder? Councillor Zile.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. I have nothing much further to add, except to say that this is an annual process and procedure, and that the Council has the responsibility to approve and then implement the funding formula for the forthcoming 2023-24 year. Thank you.
Are you therefore all in agreement?
Thank you, Deputy Leader. This report can be found in supplementary agenda number 2. Basically, there's 3 separate items in this report. One is the council tax reduction scheme that was adopted last year, which has some brackets of income. During in the policy, it's written that we take the CPI of October of the year and actually increase the bands by that CPI, which is in the recommendation and the detail in the report. The second element is that that we continue to supplement the care leavers up until their 25th birthday for council tax reductions. And the third element is a council tax support fund that we have that should reduce anybody that's receiving council tax by £25, which will be coming out of our current scheme or come from our current scheme. So the Cabinet is asked to agree to delegate authority to the CFO in consultation with the leader and portfolio holder for business management and implement the council tax support scheme, which can be found in 10.1. 10.2, the Cabinet is asked to, 10.1 is for the Cabinet to delegate, to recommend to full council to adopt the council tax reduction scheme, reflecting the bands that are updated in Appendix 1. 10.2, the Cabinet is asked to agree and delegate the authority to the CFO in consultation with the leader and the portfolio holder for business management to implement the council tax support scheme in line with the government guidance to grant a mandatory £25 rebate to each recipient of the council tax reduction scheme for 2023-24 as set out in paragraph 5.3 of the report. And finally, Cabinet is asked to agree the care leavers discretionary relief policy set out in the Appendix 2 to become permanent from April 2023.
Anyone else wish to speak on that? Councillor Mrs Isles.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. I am very pleased to know that the council tax discretionary policy for care leavers is now permanent, and to say that, or to refer to the reporting where we are saying how many care leavers have benefited from this discretionary relief scheme. I would also like to add that in particular the impact, the good impact, you know, the help that this is given, the impact of this against the current cost of living crisis is very much appreciated by our care leavers. Thank you.
Are you all? Did you wish to speak, Councillor Galvin?
Yes, I'd just like to support Councillor Earle's statement there. As a member of the Corporate Parenting Board, I'm delighted that we've made this extra payment permanent. As Mrs Earle says, you know, these are difficult times, and a lot of young people have had to resort to the bank of mum and dad. So we're effectively mum and dad to these young people, and I think it's only right that we should give them a helping hand, and I'm delighted that we've now made that payment permanent.
Right, thank you. Not gone on, damn. There are, however, I think, two important changes of policy contained in section 3.2 on page 54, which I do ask the Cabinet to agree. The first is the limit for fixed rate lending to subsidiaries of the Council needs to be increased from 100 million to 125 million. Now that is because the Medway Development Company is pushing ahead fast with the development of the new city centre for Medway, and it is now at a critical part of the scheme as it builds out the 5 blocks comprising Chatham waterfront before these 5 blocks can be sold or let on long-term leases. Secondly, it is proposed to increase the monetary limit for borrowing at variable rates from 100 to 150 million. Significant capital receipts are confidently expected over the next few years as these schemes work through, and this makes longer-term borrowing less attractive or necessary. The Council is continuing to operate within its capital financing requirement, demonstrating that the Council does not find it necessary to borrow to meet ongoing revenue requirements. The Audit Committee has already examined the Treasury strategy in detail. Their comments were positive, and they are contained in the report, and they recommended it both Cabinet and Council. Accordingly, I ask you to approve the recommendations contained in section 7 of the report, which include recommending the strategy for final approval by full Council. I so move. Councillor Hackman.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I fully support this increase to the fixed term rate. It will enable MDC to borrow more money and give us a bit more flexibility. And they're doing some wonderful work in Chatham Town Centre, and we don't want to stop that. I also agree with the increase in the LOBO rate. Given that our capital receipts will be coming over the next few months and years, it doesn't make any sense to borrow at long-term rates. So the short-term LOBO rates would be far better to be used and gives us that extra flexibility to borrow the money. And I also echo Councillor Doe's comment about the Audit Committee. I think that I read with interest their questions that they asked, and they are doing a proper job of examining the Treasury report, and so I'd like to congratulate them for their scrutiny. I think it was very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you agree those recommendations? Thank you. The next one is the revenue budget monitoring, round 3 and 22 to 23. Now, that, as you may gather, again will fall to me in the absence of the leader and portfolio holder for finance. But I'd like to refer you to table 1 on page 134, from which you will see that... Pardon? Yeah, I have. Yeah. And, sorry, derail what I was going to say now. Sorry. Yeah. But you'll see the anticipated annual deficit forecast in Q2 of 14.02 million has modestly reduced to 12.3 million, which is still a cause for considerable concern. Of this deficit, 18.2 million is attributable to the overspends in children and adult services. And there are a number of reasons for this. First, the number of service users has significantly increased, and so has the cost of placements, resulting in a £5.8 million overspend. Secondly, children's services are reporting an overspend of 7.5 million, owing to the very high cost of residential care for looked after children. And thirdly, education services are forecasting a deficit of 5.2 million, mainly due to a large increase in the cost of transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities, known as SEND, and an increase in demand and the impact of the safety valve programme, which redistributed £2.9 million from the dedicated schools grant to the general fund. Now, I think the Council's discretionary services, such as regeneration, culture and business support, have, on the other hand, kept broadly within budget. But the good news within all this is that the interest and financing are reported as supporting a saving, mainly due to no longer having to make a contribution budgeted at 5.5 million to what is called the minimum revenue position. This kind of pressure on social services is being felt right across the country and is causing many councils to have to dip heavily into their reserves. This is simply not sustainable in the long term, and it's no good government rightly demanding high standards of care without giving councils the means to pay for them. And accordingly, I move the recommendation contained in section 13 that the Cabinet note the results of the third round of revenue budget monitoring for 2022-23 and instruct senior management to continue to exercise tight control to reduce expenditure within their areas and to identify a range of management actions to reduce expenditure or increase income. I so move. Councillor Golfin.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and I'm happy to second those recommendations. Whilst, as you say, an overspend of 12.3 million is no insignificant sum, but if you work it out as a percentage of the total spend for the year, it's only 3.3%. I say only. But when you consider the past year has been a year of extreme inflation, in fact, the highest inflation we've seen for many, many years, and you couple that with the 18.2 overspend in children and adults, to at this stage only have 3.3 deficit is quite an achievement, and I think the officers are to be congratulated across the piece of how they've kept costs under control overall. So whilst it is not a nice position to be in, it could, I believe, have been considerably worse, and as I say, I hope the officers to be congratulated on the work they've done in reducing this, working alongside us as portfolio holders. And I'm confident that we can close that gap even further in the next few weeks. So whilst, yes, it is not a good situation to be in, I believe under the circumstances we haven't done too badly.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. With the responsibility of adult services, I think it worth pointing out that we are in fact a people-led service, as we are with children's services, and there are other areas. And of course there are areas over which, unfortunately, we have absolutely no control. In fact, no control being the number of people that come forward and are required to make use of the services that are provided, because, as I said, we are a people-led service. And the sad thing is that if a week before the end of the financial year something serious happens and we are required to place somebody into a special care package, that's exactly what we have to do. It's our statutory responsibility. And sadly, with it would come an additional overspend, and I can make no apologies for what may or may not happen as we progress towards the end of this financial year. Later on in the meeting, a cabinet meeting, I'll in fact be presenting a paper on the fair cost of care, which goes back to December 2021, when all local authorities were I say requested in inverted commas by the central government for local authorities, including Medway Council, to take a look at what is the fair cost of care. And Medway, as always, takes very special interest in these areas, and try as we may, we have reduced the expenditure as much as we possibly can. But the fact is that we are in the position where we are. Some of it has been brought about by COVID, and I don't know for how many years we will continue to refer back to the bad old days of COVID. But the fact is, Deputy Leader, that in our wish to support the local NHS provision, we found ourselves in a position of assisting people into supported and care beds in order to free up hospital spaces for people who needed them. But of course with it comes a cost. And sadly, the decision of the NHS at the time was indeed to throw money at the problem. So if a care home was there and they had some beds, and they were reluctant, the care home's reluctant to take on these additional people, then NHS would do no more and pay whatever was demanded, which completely destabilised our local market here in Medway and indeed across the country. Particularly as it was then decided by the central government that, and indeed NHS, that after a 6-week period, this would no longer, people in these care beds would no longer be the responsibility of the NHS, but it would fall from health into adult social care, meaning that we were picking up additional costs associated with these additional costs that were being paid and claimed by care homes, leading us to where we are today. And this really has been the contributing factor to where we are today. I'm not making excuses, I'm just stating facts, Deputy Leader, that we as a local authority, together with local authorities across the country, are having to deal with now as we come towards the end of this financial year, and indeed what's going to come next year in our budget setting.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Isles.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. Yes, most also applies to the children's services, but I can assure that ongoing work has been part of our improvement journey, particularly with the cost of, or increased costs in placements, where our commissioning teams are working extremely hard to mitigate those financial pressures by market forces. But I must stress, not to the detriment of the services themselves, and likewise with the send transport. Again, we are closely looking at that to improve the service, but obviously, bring down the costs. So it is work in progress at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Chitty.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Sad to say that for the last 20 years, at this time, I've always repeated myself when it comes to these costs. Successive governments have quite cynically passported over what was their responsibility onto local government without recognising the costs, which obviously is very important, but also the responsibility of care. And every authority, I think, would say that that is a premier thing that local government really is committed to do. Now, the sadness is that we are prevented from doing not just the basic statutory duty, but the other elements related to care, whether it's children, whether it's adults, that we as an authority would very much like to pursue. However, by this action over the last years, we are prevented from doing it by the responsibility. Does the government, successive governments, not want it, or do they just not want the responsibility of paying for it? So, therefore, I think as an authority, we face up to what indeed we have to do, the requirements. But I think we also understand very, very cynically that by passporting over these, the nature of these funding to the council, then that is a dreadful reflection on government, who are not, they talk that everybody should have this right and that right, but if they do not increase local government funding, they will not, we will not, as an authority, be able to provide it. Now, I remember many, many years ago, Councillor Chambers saying, if we have to support all of this, there will be no money for anything else. Is that right? You know, we like to look at the community as a whole, but that is becoming the reality of it. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Anyone else? Rowan? I think that one thing I would say, I think that we have to set this in the national context, and I agree with most of what Councillor Mrs Chitty was saying, and the two portfolio holders. I think, you know, there's this kind of disconnect in government. On the one hand, there's the government watchdogs that go around expecting really good standards for children and really good standards for adults and care, and quite right too. But if you do that, there's got to be the matching finance to deliver that service. And as a result, the council often gets blamed for what they term an inadequate service. It isn't an inadequate service at all. It's an inadequately financed service. And I think both areas it's true. And I think that when you read, as I read in the paper today, that 3 councils have gone technically bankrupt, same cause to a certain extent, nor is it confined to parties. I think one's Conservative, one's Labour, and one's no overall control. So, I mean, you know, I do think that this is a very important issue that government's just got to recognise, that it's got to decide the amount of care or the standard of care that it wants, and it's got to enable councils to meet that bill with grants. Otherwise, this whole system will virtually collapse, because obviously ratepayers feel that one small section of the community, if you like, is actually getting the services, whilst the services for the rest of the community that don't need that help, fortunately, are actually then being run down. Now, we've not got to that stage yet. I hope we never will. But I think we will get to it eventually if the government doesn't recognise this, and it'll happen all over the country. I've already heard in some places that various leisure provisions are being closed, and libraries, of course, are being closed all over the place. And I really do think that this is something which, once you close these things, once you do away with them, they very seldom come back. And I think that the government's got to deal with this situation. It can't go on like this. It really can't. And I don't say that as a political comment, because both Labour and Conservative governments don't like this issue. Because basically, somehow, councils up till now have actually coped. And this was because they had a sensible level of reserves. But actually, most councils now are drawing very heavily on their reserves, as indeed we shall have to do if things don't improve for this year. I do think that this is something that nationally has to be addressed. And I hope that the government will listen to the comments it's getting, not just from me, but from local government all around the country, that they have to listen to this, otherwise the consequences of this are really incalculable. Which is our next item. This is for the current year, third quarter. It does present the results of that quarters monitoring. And it's particularly interesting to note, I think, the sheer scale of the programme on this year and beyond at the moment, which is running at some 472 million. Now, I think that vast programme is broadly in line with the budget, and I think this shows how well the Council, in fact, does control it. And in fact, the only one that isn't slightly within the budget is the 591,000, which is on the school pressure on the school basic needs programme, and that will itself be contraed out next year by an adjustment to the basic needs grant allocation. So I think that I do congratulate the officers and my cabinet colleagues for managing these schemes so well. I think that they don't just happen, they require an awful lot of concentration, otherwise extra costs just pile up, particularly in the current climate where materials and labour are difficult to get. So I do ask the Cabinet to agree the recommendations in section 14, which include 3 environment requests, you will see, which are self-explanatory, but perhaps, I know Councillor Potter, would you like to say anything more on that? Okay, fine. Anyone else wish to speak on this? In that case, do you all agree the capital position? Note it. Right, thank you very much. At the risk of wearing your ears out, I'm afraid item 10 is also mine. And that is to the housing revenue account, capital and revenue budgets for the coming year, which we always identify separately. The report does present the HRA capital and revenue budgets for the coming year, and it also gives details of the proposed rent and service charge levels. You will see from the overall budget table, which is on page 197, that the income to the HRA is forecast to be 16.2 million, which of course mainly comes from rent, and the total expenditure is virtually the same after taking into account a 1.4 million contribution from that towards the capital required for the current affordable house building programme. This also maintains the working balance of some 5.2 million to meet any unforeseen contingencies, which of course we're seeing that is happening, unfortunately, the way the labour market and so on is going and costs are rising. It is a long report, which I hope you've all read, but it might be useful for me to summarise the key points. First, rents for existing tenants will rise by 7%, which, although it's below the current rate of inflation, of course, I think that is necessary to sustain the account. For the reasons set out in section 3 of that report, the rents for new tenants will be at the affordable rent level, which is increased by 11.1%, but is still way below the market level. Garage rents will be increased by 10% to £12.57 a week, plus, of course, VAT for non-council tenants. The HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, is constantly benchmarked against other similar-sized housing organisations. And I'm pleased to say that we are in the top or second quartile for all our services. And as we go on, I'm looking forward to seeing if we can get even more into that top quartile, the top 25% of providers, because I think the service is really continuing to improve and is run on a continuing improvement basis. The control of voids continues to be tight, and it's forecast that rent void loss will be only 0.68% of budget. Now, that has risen by a small percentage, actually 0.19%, due to problems with procuring materials and labour. And that means that sometimes properties remain longer vacant than they otherwise would if we didn't have those sort of problems. But we are overcoming them, and it's still low. Rent collection is good, but it's adversely affected by the universal credit system. That's because the credits are paid to the tenant, who in turn should pay the council, whereas before they were paid to the council direct. Now that leads to delays, and there are problems when changes of circumstance notifications may be late or in the system and so on. And in fact, 2/3 of all the current arrears are attributable to the 43% of tenants who are in the universal credit system. And because it means that instead of the rents being paid direct into the council, we then have to make sure that the tenants don't spend it on something else, they spend it on the rents. We've had to employ 2 specialist tenancy sustainment officers to stop tenants to enable tenants really to resist the temptation not to budget properly, and therefore to spend it on other priorities, which is easy to say, but on a limited income, that I do know that the pressures are there, and I do have great sympathy for that. So on the capital side, you'll see this is operated on a 3-year rolling programme, as set out in the table on page 183. It shows that in 23-24, it's intended to spend 4.6 million on planned maintenance and adaptations, as well as 12 million on the new build acquisition programme, which is going full swing at the moment. We're dealing with phases 5 and 6. Accordingly, I ask you to agree the recommendations in section 20 of the report and thereby approve the overall budget for 23-24. But of course, you will also be returning to that within the scale of the ordinary budget as well. Does anyone wish to comment on that? Councillor Goldwyn.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. I'd particularly like to comment on in section 9, the House Building Development Programme. It's good to see, as a council, we are substantially investing in good quality social housing for our residents at a time when we've got too many families in temporary accommodation. This will make a significant contribution to providing those families with good homes. You mentioned the £12.5 million building programme. That also will be supplemented later on by the 44 new properties that will be going to the housing revenue account, which is the affordable 106 contribution from the Chatham waterfront development. So it's not just regenerating our city centre in Chatham. We're also providing new homes in Gillingham at Britton Farm. So all in all, I think this is a really good programme. I think the housing revenue account is doing some good work, because I've seen all the refurbishment programmes go through regular intervals through the Procurement Board. So we're investing in new properties, and we're also investing in making sure our existing housing stock is kept up to a good standard for their tenants. So all in all, I think this is a very good report. My congratulations go to our housing department, because I think they're doing a splendid job. But thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak on this? Then I take it you accept those recommendations? Yes. Thank you. Now, the last of this run of items, you'll be pleased to know, you're sick of the sound of my voice, but there we are. Item 11 is the capital and revenue budgets for 2023-24, which obviously is the keynote of this particular meeting. And for that, you'll need to turn to the supplementary agenda, number 2, which starts on page 3 of that and goes through to 118. The table that I would refer you to, actually, is on page 157 of the supplementary agenda, number 2. And you'll see there that this shows a total projected expenditure of 390 million and an income of 388 million. Now, you may remember that when we first considered the draft budget in November, and we projected a budget deficit of some 29 million, which we all cringed, because it would wipe out our reserves in one, virtually. But I think by the arduous work of officers and yourselves as cabinet members, this has been reduced to 2 million, which will need to be withdrawn from reserves, although I know we can rely on officers working with cabinet members to try and reduce this to 0 as the year progresses. The government has now published the provisional settlement, and this allows upper tier authorities like Medway to increase their council tax by up to 5% without the need for a referendum. Now, this includes a special precept for adult social care of 2%. The proposed budget proposes a council tax increase of 4.994%, which would take the figure for a Band D property in Medway up to £1,671 a year, which equates to £79 odd extra a year or £1.53 extra a week. Now, no one likes increases, I think, but quite honestly, I think that the 5% in all the 4.994% is not unreasonable, particularly if we are going to have to shoulder more and more of social care. But I come back to what I said earlier, which I won't repeat, but I do think that the mismatch between resources that the council has and the task that needs to be done has got to be sorted out. In terms of expenditure, the budget does reflect the rising costs of children and adult social care, increases of over £6 million for adult social care, in addition to the 2% precept referred to earlier, and over £5 million for children's services. A further £6 million rise is required for education. Now, more than £4 million extra is included for regeneration, culture and environmental services. This is due largely to inflationary uplifts on services delivered through external contracts and the increased cost of utilities across the council's property estate, which is quite significant. I'm afraid that 3.6 million more will be required for business support and interest and financing, mostly the cost of borrowing to finance the council's capital programme. But that, of course, in itself is I think, good value for money. On staff pay, the Cabinet's asked to note the recommendation to full council of the Employment Matters Committee to apply a general cost of living increase of £1,000 pro rata to all staff and to create a gap of £500 between pay ranges 2 to 4. Turning to the capital budget, I would refer members to Table 5 on page 135, from which you will see the total capital requirement is £427 million. I will also draw your attention to the proposed additions to the capital programme as set out in Table 7 on page 138. Under my own portfolio, I'm very pleased to see the purchase of a new mobile library and also the repair that's necessary to the Dickens Chalet. But I'm sure that my colleague, Councillor Filmer, will welcome the 1.5 million extra that we're investing in highways improvements, which I think we all know is very much badly needed in the current situation. Alongside the standard budget requirements, you'll see that we're including in the proposed recommendations to full council the transfer of £3 million from general reserves to an earmarked reserve to be used in the event that the deficit recovery plan does not reduce the DSG deficit in line with the agreement within the Safety Valve Intervention Programme. We are also recommending that we cease to fund external landlords to provide sheltered housing, giving a 6-month notice period from the 1st of April 2023, as is set out clearly in section 7.4 of the report. I'm sure that some of you will wish to highlight particular features within your portfolios, but I ask the Cabinet now to agree the recommendations contained in section 23 of the report and invite anyone else who wishes to speak. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. As you quite rightly said, I always welcome any money, additional money to go into highways. But looking through the budget, we give a fantastic service on all the frontline stuff we do. I mean, the waste service is probably the best in the country. Highways welcome this money because we have set up a new team, additional team, to try and overcome the problem we have at the moment with potholes. But looking through, we're not increasing car parking charges, and frontline services will stay the same as we promised many years ago, and long may it continue.
Is there anyone else? Yes, Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And thank you, Councillor Filmer, for raising the very issues that you have with regard to the services that you provide with highways and frontline services. And I'm sure that all of my colleagues around the table would agree that the service provided is certainly one of the best there is to be found in the country. And everywhere we go, certainly in my ward, the favourable comments that are passed on to us as ward councillors regarding the service is exemplary. the one thing that I really would support you on, and that is that over the last month or so, like everywhere else, we've been hit with lots of criticism regarding potholes and the like in the roads. Well, what I've been doing, Councillor Filmer, in fact, is to do a little bit of analysis in my own ward. And I've seen the potholes, but what I've done, in fact, is that I've examined those potholes and gone a little bit further. And I can tell you now, Councillor Filmer, that every one of those potholes that people are complaining about is not down to Medway Council. They are, in fact, down to the utility services, gas, electricity, water, telephone, all of these people, and I make no excuse for naming and shaming them here in the Cabinet meeting, they are responsible for the failing and the creation of potholes. Medway Council are in fact the organisation, the local authority, who are having to pick up the tab for the failures of the workmanship that has been provided. And I think that this is something that really collectively as a council, and perhaps we ought to be seeking support from other councils around the country to say, utilities, you cause the damage, you fix it. And I mean this quite sincerely, Councillor Filmer. I think that it's long overdue that we as a local authority are having to create a team, send out people, fix the problem, and the local utilities, national utilities, just go about their business thinking it's all a big joke. So I support what's in the Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Leader. Well, firstly, with children and adults, we have seen a perfect storm of recent, with high inflation, challenges with the market in terms of staffing, and challenges with the market in terms of placements. Now, hopefully, with this year going forwards, inflation will fall. That's forecast to happen. And as a council, we have a number of initiatives in place and in the pipeline with regard to the staffing pressures and with regard to placements. But, there will still be huge pressures there going forwards. I won't rerun that debate we had earlier around funding the service adequately and sort of in terms of the government's role in this. Sort of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. On one hand, he's got these watchdogs, quite rightly saying you need to deliver services at a certain standard, and our children and young people deserve the very best, as do those in adult social care. But on the other side, you've got the right hand not providing the finances to go with it. So that challenge will go on. But I commend officers with all the work they've done over this year and in terms of setting this budget for next year. In terms of the capital programme, we've got a really excellent team here at Medway Council, very well supported by the procurement team in Councillor Galvin's portfolio holder and wider business support, who over a number of years have delivered projects which have meant we've been able to increase school places and expand the number of schools across Medway, keeping up with that demand with a growing population, tens of millions of pounds, thousands of school places created, including expanding our grammar schools, so we retain that proportion of children that are able to go on to a grammar school if that is the right pathway for them. So we should be extremely proud of what we've done and what we've delivered there. And of course, we're also working with the Department for Education with regard to the Free Schools programme, although that's been far more challenging because unlike the Medway Council-led projects, we don't have control of that. So we've done our very best to work with the Department for Education, and we continue to do so, and also with regard to the SEND provision as well, and that all fits in with that safety valve programme with the high needs deficit as well. And there's been some incredible work by officers in terms of securing that and taking that forward as well. So a lot to be proud of there. And actually, I think I should say at this point that I think it's right that we had the council plan refresh on the agenda today, because this budget is the other side of the coin with the council plan. That's our ambitions. that's what we want to deliver for the people of Medway, but actually it's the budget, it's the finances that enable us to do that. So I think it's quite right that they're both on this agenda today. In terms of the wider capital programme, I'm delighted that Splashes is going forward. So I look forward to breaking the ground very soon on that in Raynham, a great facility for the people of Raynham, but also for the people of Medway, ensuring that we retain a leisure provision here. And of course, that's how many youngsters actually get into swimming in the first place, is actually going to a leisure pool. Monumental regeneration ongoing, particularly the work of MDC. And when we talk about how, over the years, we've innovated to set the sustainable budgets despite all the pressures, it's actually things like MDC and the work we do with North that's enabled us to do that. Really pleased to see that extra funding going into highways. I think the team have actually done a brilliant job, actually, in tackling the issues caused by the freezing weather conditions. Councillor Brake's quite right. A lot of these issues do stem from failed reinstatements. You know, but even where you've had nicely resurfaced highways, the utilities have come along, they've dug it up, and it's a weak spot on the highway. So you're quite right that is a big area of challenge, which unfortunately is not something that's come from what we're doing here at Medway Council, but we're doing our best to tackle that issue. And all of this ambitious programme, we've still got our weekly bin collection, probably the best in the country, if not beyond. Car park charge is frozen and still the lowest council tax in Kent. So we can be very proud of all that we've achieved here, and I think this is an ambitious budget to deliver on the ambitious council plan. Thank you.
Councillor Chitty.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I'd like to pick up on a point that Councillor Brake made in relation to utilities coming along, making an almighty mess, not reinstating what was there prior to them doing the work. And I would hope that representation can be made to the local government association, who are very much a powerful organisation, who as a body could make very strong representation to force, if you like, utilities to face up to the responsibilities that they undoubtedly have. I think there's been a lot of discussion about profit margins recently as far as the utilities are concerned. So it would be a very positive move if they were committed to reinstating what they actually have created detrimentally to various different areas of the roads and pavements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Thank you. Can I just close in by saying that I think the one thing which I ought to point out in a number of recommendations that are in section 23, I'm not going to, you can read them for yourselves, I don't think I need to read them out loud to you, but one that particularly I think is interesting is you'll notice that the council is being much harder on long-term empty properties. And I think that's the new powers that we've got from the government. What it means is that where properties have been empty for 1 year, the council tax 100% kicks in. They have to start paying. And if it goes on for 2 years, then it doubles up on itself. And that's quite right, really. And I think that whilst there may be, and there's very valid reasons for it, we obviously need, as far as we can, to see that those all houses possibly that are capable of occupation are occupied, and that's what we endeavour to do. Are you all content with that? Those recommendations, which I say are contained in that section 23? Thank you very much. We now come on to adult social care, the fair cost of care, which is Councillor Rake's territory, I think.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. By way of introduction to this item, first of all, I'd like to remind members that there are some exempt appendix that apply to this item. Now, in December 2021, the government announced the Market Sustainability and Fair Cost of Care Fund. The intended purpose of this fund aligns with Section 5 of the Care Act 2014, which places a duty on local authorities to promote the efficient and effective operation of a market in services for meeting care and support needs, with a view to ensuring services are diverse, sustainable and of a high quality for the local population, including those who pay for their own care. All councils in England were required to carry out a fair cost of care exercise as detailed in the policy paper and further guidance released by the Department of Health and Social Care on the 24th of March 2022. The cost of care exercise provided an opportunity for local authority commissioners and local care providers to work together to arrive at a shared understanding of what it costs to run quality and sustainable care provision in the local area, and that is reflective of local circumstances. The Cabinet should be aware that this relates to older people, care homes, 65 plus years, and home care providers on the 18 plus years. Care homes for adults under 65, supported living and daycare are not included. Where average fee rates are below the fair cost of care, local authorities are expected to use the fund to increase fee rates paid to providers. The guidance recognises that this is a journey and refers to moving towards a fair cost of care. However, it is important to note that if funding from central government is not adequate, this has the potential to cause significant financial pressures for the council. This will be carefully monitored and appropriate discussions will take place if necessary. The Department of Health and Social Care requires councils to publish the cost of care exercise reports, as shown in Appendices 2 and 3, by the 1st of February 2023 on Medway Council website. The publication of Cabinet papers on the 30th of January achieves this deadline. However, the information must be published in a more prominent area on the site once this has been presented to Cabinet. In this case, there is an urgent need to publish the cost of care exercise report on the Council's website in order to meet the DHSC requirements. On this occasion, it is proposed that the call-in period be waived to prevent any further delay in publishing the report. The Chairman of the Health and Adult Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee has agreed that the decision proposed are reasonable in all the circumstances and to them being treated as a matter of urgency and to waive the call-in. The Market Sustainability Plan is one where the local authorities are required to submit and publish their final Market Sustainability Plan at the end of March 23. The Market Sustainability Plan requires us to identify the key risks to market sustainability for the 65 plus care home market and the 18 plus domiciliary care market, and to establish care to address any issues identified, including how market sustainability funding will be used. Now, a draft market sustainability plan, which is included in the exempt appendix, was submitted by Medway Council to the Department of Health and Social Care using the FCOC exercise to assess the impact current fee rates are having on the market and the potential future risks. The draft plan is a work in progress, and a meeting with the Department of Health and Social Care took place on the 24th of January to discuss the draft submissions and to discuss the Council's proposal to ensure the market is indeed sustainable. This has led to the meeting with providers, as mentioned in paragraph 4.8 of the Cabinet report, being delayed until February. The final version will be submitted by the deadline and published accordingly. The recommendations are as outlined, and the Cabinet is requested to approve the publication of the cost of care exercise reports as set out in Appendices 2 and 3 of the report. The Cabinet is requested to agree in principle the publication and submission to the Department of Health and Social Care of the Market Sustainability Plan as set out in the exempt appendix of the report and delegate authority to the Director of People, Children and Adults in consultation with the Portfolio for Adult Services to finalise the market sustainability plan following receipt of feedback from the Department of Health and Social Care. The Cabinet is asked to agree that recommendation 10.1 is considered urgent and therefore should not be subject to calling. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Leader. But very happy to support this. Councillor Brake, I know, is very, very good on this side of things, and always happy to support you. From my point of view, regarding care homes, I like the wording shared understanding, because there's an awful lot in the care homes where COVID was a case where without the care homes, the NHS would have had so much bed blocking, but the NHS found extra money to pay the homes when there was COVID. So it needs to be some joined up thinking, because the care side of things, the costs with the heating, the staff, everything else, food, all the prices are increasing. So this shared understanding is certainly the way to go on this. So I'm very happy to support this.
Thank you. Any other member? Did you wish to say anything further, Councillor Brake?
I'll just say thank you, Councillor Filmer, for your comments and support. You're absolutely right with regard to the cost. And as I alluded to in a previous agenda item, during COVID, certainly the health sector had money that they could actually throw at the problem to free up beds and to pay for care homes to absorb the responsibility. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, after 6 weeks, unbeknown to us, we were to find that as a local authority, all of a sudden the health provision closed ranks, and we as a local authority were left to pick up the tab at excess costs. So thank you again for your support. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Are you all in agreement with the recommendations contained in section 10? Thank you very much. We then come on to the WHO development framework and the outcome of consultation. Councillor Chitty.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. The consultation document set out an indicative master plan and key principles to guide potential future development on the WHO Peninsula. The Council widely publicised the consultation and sent a summary leaflet to all householders on the WHO Peninsula and neighbouring areas. Officers held staffed exhibitions in High Holstow, Chatham, where people could view materials and speak directly with officers. 147 written responses were received to the consultation. 70% of the comments were made by members of the public, who were largely residents of the WHO Peninsula and neighbouring areas. Comments from local residents and parish councils generally raised concern about the impact associated with large-scale development, including transport, wider infrastructure and services, and the environment. These comments are consistent with earlier representations and discussions held with parish councils and neighbourhood planning groups in recent years. Some comments also made reference to aspects of the HIF programme. Sustainable transport, including improvements to bus services, was viewed as a critical to any consideration of further growth on the WHO Peninsula. And I think that that is a very fair item that is highlighted. Wider views were received from developers and business sector who were broadly supportive. Other responses reflected the main interest of stakeholders such as environmental groups. Most comments focused on strategic matters rather than commenting on detail and the content of the consultation document. The status of the framework and its relationship to the new local plan and its evidence base was raised in several representations. The comments have been recorded and published. The Planning Service has reviewed the comments for consideration, and it is part of the ongoing work of the new local plan, which basically means the reflection of those comments will be viewed. What I'm seeking this afternoon is the Cabinet is requested to note the outcomes of the consultation on the draft WHO development framework. And I will repeat, to note the recommendation.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Support everything that Mrs. Chitty has said. I think it will be interesting to note as to why we consulted on what effectively was a draft development plan, and that is quite clearly outlined in 2.3 on page 242, where we did listen to what people were saying to us, and and as it says in there, residents have asked for information about the potential development plans for the WHO Peninsula and further details of the WHO development framework. So therefore, we decided that we would publish the draft framework for consultation in advance of the next stage of the work on the local plan, which Mrs. Chitty has indeed alluded to. And of course, the comments that have been received from this consultation will be taken into consideration as part of the preparation of the next phase of the local plan. And I can give assurances that they will be taken into consideration. My only sadness was, we all know of the concerns of the residents of the WHO and the peninsula over proposals coming forward in the HIF and were in the local plan, which is now being reconsidered. And I would have hoped that, incidentally, there are 39, according to the last 2011 census, there are 39,000 people living on the peninsula. That doesn't mean that they're all of an age that would, in fact, make representations. So I think, and taking into consideration, as I've said, the concerns that are expressed in different elements of the media, both social media and printed media, I'm rather sad that there were only 147 responses to this consultation, because this was an opportunity for residents to actually express their views and indeed their concerns, because we all know that they have concerns, and I would have hoped that because of those concerns there was more than the 147 responses that we received. And indeed, I just bring to colleagues' attention before somebody says, well, we didn't know about it, if you go look on page 244 at item 6, which it says consultation, you will see in that, if you read down, the breadth of the consultation and that was undertaken both in meetings and in fact through literature, through local media, etc. So I just say that I would have hoped, in view of the understandable concerns of the residents on the peninsula, that we would have had more than 147 responses. But there we are. We are where we are. We did consult over a considerable period of time, and it was from the 23rd of September to the 25th of November. Often on other consultations, you get the comments that, well, that there was insufficient time to make the comment, I would judge that that
Yep.
period was adequate for comments to be made. So I will support the proposal that Mrs. Chitty has made, that this report be noted and therefore will go on as part of the consideration of the development of the local plan. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and I also fully support Councillor Chitty's proposals. Like Councillor Chambers, I'm a little bit intrigued as to the level of response, because if you follow local media, there is supposed to be a huge groundswell of people not wanting development on the Hoo Peninsula. Well, this consultation shows no large groundswell against what's proposed at all. 147 responses was not dissimilar to the amount of responses we got for the refurbishment of the Paddock site in Chatham a few weeks ago. So I find that quite interesting indeed, particularly when you think that in order to make that consultation comprehensive, all households in the Hoo Peninsula and wider were distributed with a leaflet, plus all the meetings and things that Councillor Chambers has mentioned. So whilst I will fully accept that the majority of those that did respond were against the proposals, I think this evidence is that most people do accept that we do need to build homes for people for the future, and people do expect to have good quality infrastructure, and certainly the funding that we've been able to achieve from the HIF funding will enable that good quality infrastructure to be put in. So I'm looking forward to us providing good homes for Medway people in the future, and hopefully we can get our council the development plan through now. We've had and get on with the business of providing homes and stopping also speculative proposals coming forward, which in the absence of our local plan, developers are putting speculative developments in and putting them in places that will not have the infrastructure and the facilities put in that the HIF funding has enabled us to do so. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and thank you, Councillor Chitty, for this paper. I'd just like to remind members and indeed the community and those that may be following this Cabinet meeting that it's got to be 10, 12 years ago now that a consultation was undertaken across the Hoo Peninsula, where various proposals were put forward and indeed involved the young people attending schools at that time to come up with their suggestions and ideas as to how the Hoo Peninsula could be developed. And I remember very clearly when I attended the presentation, and the presentations were made and put together by young people that made it very clear that they loved living out on the Hoo Peninsula, they loved their environment, and it was a place that they wanted to live in the future. And I think perhaps, dare I say this, but I think there's parents and grandparents that seem to forget that there are children around that would still like to live out on the Hoo Peninsula. But where are they going to live? The number of people that are giving up their homes and moving away from the home, from the Hoo Peninsula, is certainly not enough to accommodate for young people wanting to continue living in an environment which they come to love and want to remain. Perhaps it might be worth, if it was at all possible, that if only we could speak to 10, 12 years on, those young people who are probably in their early 20s now. What has changed? How many of you have managed to stay where you are in the Hoo Peninsula? and how many of you have actually moved out. And I would suggest that there is still that need for housing to satisfy the demands and the wishes of the young people coming through the system. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Councillor Chitty, do you want to sum
Yes,
up?
thank you. Some comments there that are very relevant and often forgotten. I remember some, 18 years ago, going onto the peninsula to one of the presentations that officers were giving. And the growth plan for the peninsula was very clear. And all of the issues that related to it, for example, highway issues, being able to have the highway to support, the transport to support, and also the schools to support. And part of that process, there was a particular meeting that was focused on young people, and they gathered from schools that were providing places for the peninsula. And I remember speaking to one particular girl who was really very involved. She wanted to know just about everything. And I said, "What's important to you?" Her reply was significant. "I've lived here all my life. My parents have lived here for a very long time, and I want to stay here." And I said, well, that's a little bit of a conundrum, because in order to facilitate that, the housing has to be there for you to actually move to. And she said, "I understand that as well," rather putting me in my place, which I thought was lovely. And she said, "The other concern I have is environmental. And there should be a balance between providing houses for me when I'm old enough, and also protecting the environmental issues that go with it." And I have carried her thoughts with me throughout the ensuing years, because it is obviously very challenging for people that have lived in a place for donkey's years to see significant changes. Of course it is, and it presents them with particular challenges. However, time moving on, we absolutely have to reflect on what the community will need in the coming years. What's exacerbated this, obviously, is the local plan, government requirements, and the housing numbers that were laid out by government. That's a different issue. As far as I'm concerned, we have engaged with the residents. Human nature will probably say we haven't, but indeed we have. And I look forward to managing someone to manage this process, challenging as it might be. So this request actually is to note the outcomes of the consultation of the development framework in Ho.
Right. Do you agree to note those recommendations?
Agree.
Good. Thank you.
Sorry, was I?
Item 14 we come to now. Fifth Neighbourhood Plan request to send to referendum. That we can deal with that more speedily.
More, I promise you I can. I wish to compliment the people involved in this process in Cliffe, the residents who actually took part and were very focused on the neighbourhood plan. The recommendation is that Cabinet approves the neighbourhood plan be modified in accordance with the examiner's report. I'll just explain that very briefly. The examiner found that a number of issues that didn't actually relate to the process, so therefore that had to be singled out. But the recommendation is for a referendum on Thursday, the 4th of May.
Do you second that?
I'm happy to Yes, I'm happy to second that, Deputy Leader. I think Cliffe and Cliffwood's Parish Council and all those involved, as Councillor Chitty said, are to be congratulated. It's interesting to see the comments of the independent examiner when he says, I conclude that overall the plan is well searched, well evidenced and clearly laid out and written. If made, the plan will become a key part of the statutory development plan. The high quality plan has resulted in the very limited instances that Councillor Chitty's mentioned where I've recommended modification. So I think this is almost an exemplar and a classic example of how these plans should be done. Again, I think the Parish Council is to be congratulated. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Anyone else? Anything you wish to say, Councillor Chitty?
No, I just absolutely support the comments that Councillor Golding has made.
Well done. Okay, then do you agree with the recommendation, section 10? Right. Now we come on to Councillor Filmer's joy, the highway asset management.
We'll do this one in the fast lane, Deputy Leader. Right, this report seeks approval for adoption of the new Highways Asset Management Policy and supporting strategy. This will provide the Department of Transport for the necessary evidence of the Council's commitment to asset management in order to receive incentive funding. Now, this did go to overview and scrutiny on the 17th of January, and it's interesting to note the discussion they had. One member thought this was a tick box operation for us to get our funding. Not quite. This sets the standard of what we have to achieve. It does help us get our funding. That's not true. That is true. They also mentioned about the Medway Tunnel. And we had a closure on there. There was a fault on the IT system, which is probably about the first one we've had for probably 15 years, I think, something like that, which has been sorted out now. But we did, the funding we received going back about 5-6 months ago was for 4.9 million from the Department of Transport on the Challenge Fund. So we are getting funding through from the government. Every time we meet with the ministers, we push for more funding on the tunnel because it is a vital link for the Medway towns and one we could not do without. So the recommendation is on 10.1 and I'd like to so move.
I wish to speak on it, Councillor Potter.
Well, just very briefly, Deputy Leader, I'd just like to pay tribute to the guys in the highways team. Do incredible work. Over the years, I've bombarded them with emails and phone calls, and they've indulged me to go out on the van and join them for site inspections, whatever else, and including last month, I went round with Jason in the team, and we identified 32 signs that could be replaced or updated. So, but all these things, you know, help keep on top of maintaining our highways and what have you, and they do, as I said, incredibly hard work. So, well done to them and to you.
Do you wish to say anything further?
No, just to add to what Councillor Potter said, to thank the highways team for the incredibly hard work they put in during the snow and everything else, and hopefully we'll get on top of these road repairs at the moment. Thank you.
I'm sure we all appreciate that, actually. And I think we all need to appreciate, the public sometimes doesn't, because it only sees the hole in front of its house, as it were. But actually, we are working very, very hard. We put extra funds into it, and the team are working absolutely flat out to try to combat this. But it's not an easy thing, and you know, we don't sit back and say, "Oh, aren't we doing well?" What we're saying is we're doing as well as we can. Please bear with us, but it is difficult, I know. Are you all in agreement with the recommendation?
Yes, I am, Leader. I have to say that the advent of the transport for the South East has been through a gestation period that is quite considerable. In fact, it's 5 years since it was first mooted, and it was mooted following initiative that was suggested by government at that time, and I think there were great expectations, and there's a lot of positivity in the report that is before you today, and opportunity. But I will have one element of caution, and that is we are then reliant on central government, because the funding has to come from somewhere, and with the present government in a mood to actually analyse future spending very closely, I use that word advisedly, we can only hope that we are able to see this through to delivery, because it will benefit the southeast region. Now, I don't want you to be confused between the southeast region as known through the Southeast Enterprise Partnership, which is huge and includes Essex and a slice of East Anglia, as well as going from here to East Sussex. But this area is more coterminous with what we knew in the early days of the South East Regional Assembly area, which is a line from the M4 corridor, including the Berkshire unitaries, going down towards the coast, including Hampshire, Isle of Wight, and coming across to us here in Medway. We're probably the furthest north in that area. So the area that the transport for the southeast covers is huge, but there is great opportunities to it. And you will see there's a very comprehensive document, and unless you would like me to go through it page by page,
I think we can forego that.
There will be enormous opportunities should the money become available to achieve the goals that are outlined in that particular document. I would urge members to accept the recommendations, that we accept this report, and we continue as part of the southeast transport for the southeast, but also we are very much involved in the promotion and the development of the investment plan, and that I think is very important. It is much better to be in the tent, I've always found, when you're actually making bids to central government, rather than being on the outside, particularly when it's obvious from this report there can be enormous benefits to Medway. So I will not take this any further, Deputy Leader, other than to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Those recommendations being section 11, aren't they? Yes, Councillor Filbert.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Leader. Very happy to second this. As Councillor Chambers said, this is a very big tent, and it's very important. I mean, we're very close to Essex, London, Kent and everything, and some of the interventions, the packages they're looking at, we need to be involved, we need to put input into them, and we don't want to be accused, like they've mentioned for years now, about unitary authorities with roads to nowhere, because we want to be part of the network, but we want our input that the network doesn't chock us up. So I'm very happy to go along with this and be part of the team working on this.
Thank you. Councillor Chitty?
Yes, I totally agree. You will see by the number of portfolio holders involved how holistic this is. And certainly Councillor Chambers has played a major role in sending the right messages out. So I hope that it will be unanimously approved. The work continues, and my vote is very much in favour.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Bray.
Yep. Very quickly, Deputy Leader, I think to me it's all summed up in section 5 on page 61, where there is a map of Kent, Medway and East Sussex. And it's very clear to just note there that not a great deal happening across Kent. One or two areas, Maidstone and Ashford, are being passed through. You've got to go out to Gatwick Airport before you see any further movement. But when you look at North Kent, and in particular Medway, everything revolves around Medway. Medway, in fact, you see, is almost the crossroads of the whole of the South East, from what I can gather from this. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you. Are you all in support of recommendations contained in section 11? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to what I would describe as Councillor Goldwyn's joy, the Rochester Pier Salvage, which some people term it the phase 1 of the eventual improvement programme. But would you like to lead on this, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Deputy Leader. Making better use of our river assets is an important strategy for us as a council, and we've been exploring the best way to do this for some time. Placing these assets into an independent trust seems to be the best way forward. The Rochester Bridge Trust has very kindly funded £30,000 for a feasibility study for a river asset trust. However, before such assets can be handed over to a trust, they need to be restored back into a reasonable condition. In the case of Rochester Pier, this involves the removal of the old wooden dolphins which were used to berth pleasure steamers in the past. These are now severely rotted and liable to collapse into the river, becoming a potential hazard to navigation. The collapsed sections of the link span to the floating pontoons also need to be removed. These are placing a lateral stress onto the Victorian T section of the pier and are also damaging the floating pontoons which contain polystyrene which could pollute the river. Therefore, Deputy Leader, in moving the recommendations at 10 on page 46 of the supplementary agenda, number 1, namely, the Cabinet is asked to approve the removal of the collapsed section of Rochester Pier and timber dolphins as set out in option 2 in order to remove the potential hazard to navigation and to provide a clear location for future restoration of the pier. And 10.2, the Cabinet is asked to recommend to full council to approve the addition of £137,172 to the capital programme to be funded by borrowings. So moved. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
I'm very pleased to support that, Madam Chair, because I think that this is an essential piece of work in clearing the way for what we hope will be the restoration of the pier. Although funding for that is yet to be identified, we will have a number of partners that are interested in the river, and we shall obviously approach anyone from whom funding may or may not be available. But I think that the problem we have here, obviously, is one, I think, which is endemic in all councils. I think there's an awful lot of work required on all our assets, and I think we could probably redeploy virtually half the budget that we do each year on doing some of this stuff, because there's such a lot of it. So I think that we have to give obviously priority to a number of things. This one, I think, it would have perhaps been better if we had been able to find the money at the time, but we haven't been able to. You can't find the money for everything. And I think, therefore, we're now taking a sensible view, which is that it shouldn't be a hazard to navigation. This work will stop any risk of that, because if you have pieces floating off, obviously, you've got ships coming up and down and so on from smaller craft, and it can damage them quite severely if it's not dealt with. Also, we've got to make sure that it isn't something which the public perhaps might, or somebody at a young age might climb over the barriers and then find that things are collapsing under them, and, you know, with dire results. So I think what we need to do is to make this site tidy, and then I think under Councillor Colvin's leadership, we then got to look for funding and see if we can put together a cocktail of funding which will enable this poor pier to be properly approved. And I certainly hope that can be done. Councillor Hackwell.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, Deputy Leader, that at a planning meeting back in December, it was agreed by the Planning Committee that a significant sum of Section 106 money would be redirected towards improving the river access, which we all hoped would go along some way to go towards repairing this pontoon. So therefore, perhaps the money that we borrow won't be as significant as outlined in the paper.
Thank you very much. I should just clarify one point, I think, and that is that, of course, the Rochester Bridge Trust is not automatically committed to this. It has paid very generously for a feasibility study, and we may approach them in the future, but it's no assumption. I think it'd be unfair to say that before you know, we've approached them and probably others in order to try and generate this cocktail of funding we need. Okay? Do you all agree the recommendation? Thank you very much. On item 18, the Stardust Festival, I think at a time when obviously funding is very tight, I think this represents a really, really good opportunity for Medway to have an event really of almost national significance. This is not going to be, as some people said, a sort of glorified pop concert for days on end, and the people who are organising this are actually very well thought of. They've done lots of events elsewhere, and they've done them successfully. They're very much in partnership with the people around, so they try to minimise the disturbance. Then you will see that there is a classic, they range, it's a 4-day event. They will hold it on the Great Lines, which has always traditionally been a place where you can have large-scale events. And I think the classical concert will be fine on the Friday. They'll be followed by a dance day, to which the Medway creatives will be involved. And then on Sunday, 28th of May, the 80s, 90s and the noughties. I wonder how many noughties there are around this table, but anyway, but then on bank holiday there'll be a community and family festival. And the point I want to emphasise is this is something for virtually every part of the community to find a place here. I think it's something that's not been done on this scale before, and I think that we are able to run this event. All we're doing simply is effectively hiring the land, and they will have to meet licence conditions and so on. I mean, that's a matter that will go to other places. I think we as a Cabinet ought to support this. I think it's a major investment in our events programme. And I think it will yield income to the council, and at the same time, it will give our residents something really worthwhile to go to in the summer, and I think that's something which we ought to support. So I hope that you will encourage this, and you'll see there's details here going through this of what they've done in the past, and the fact that consultation is very important to them, because they don't have in mind to do this one-off. They really are here for the duration, as it were. They want to repeat events, not simply here and gone in 1 year. And so therefore the consultation with the public will be very important indeed, and how traffic's handled and so on. So I'd like to speak in favour of it and ask you to accept the recommendations in section 10, which is to approve the hire of the Great Lines Heritage Park for those 4 days, and to instruct officers to ensure the organisers agree to meet the terms and conditions of the location hire agreement, and that's quite very, very important, as set out in paragraph 4.7. Thank you. I think you were first, Councillor Hackwell. Then I'll bring you in, Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Very happy to support this. I think it's a great opportunity for Medway, and it's a good use of the lines rather than always have the concerts in Rochester. You know, bring some people into Gillingham and use the Great Lines. I'm sure that reading through the paper that this company is a very professional company that have put on lots of events, and they will know how to organise an event in a proper and correct manner to make sure they've got the right crowd control and parking, etc. So I have no hesitation in supporting this event.
Thank you very much. Councillor Galvin.
Yes, I'm also happy to support this. I think it's good to have an event like this in Gillingham instead of, as we usually do, have lots of events in Rochester. It will provide a boost to local shops and businesses across Medway, and I hope that Medway businesses will be given a good opportunity to provide stalls at the event, as often happens, and I'm absolutely certain that concerns over the policing of the event can be overcome by good consultation. So I think overall this is a very good thing for Medway, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Potter. I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Leader. Well, of course, I do get good use out of the Great Lines because I do the park run there on a quite regular basis. So I know practically every blade of grass on the way around. But I think this will be a tremendous boost for Gillingham and for Medway. It's a great show of confidence that this company is willing to put on an event of such a grand scale and of such high calibre in Medway. We should welcome that. There may well be concerns around policing and transport, but I see nothing there that is insurmountable. And I think this will be a great boost for Gillingham and Medway, and I hope it goes ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I too support this this event. As you know, you and I have talked a while about the greater use of the Great Lines. What I am concerned about is the process by which it has found its way to the Cabinet, bearing in mind that the recommendations are for Cabinet approval. I would have thought this should have come to the Cabinet much earlier because of the processes that have to follow on from this an event of this size, because it doesn't actually, it mentions in the at 6.5 in the programme and consultation that but it doesn't say in the risk element of it that they will need a licence. And what has happened is this item has come to the Cabinet when the licensing panel is halfway through a part heard hearing as far as this matter is concerned. And I'm just hoping that people don't assume that because the Cabinet has now approved it, that is a direction as far as the licensing process is concerned, because the licensing process is a completely different process and is separated from any decisions that may be made either by the Council or indeed by by the Cabinet. And I just feel that the process has not been handled well, because not only does the risk register talk about public safety, but in order to secure the licence, that is needed, they have to convince the licensing panel on the that there is adequate prevention, and I say an event of this size, prevention of crime and disorder, public safety and prevention of public nuisance and protection of children from harm. And they are laid down in statute that the licensing panel has to consider. And therefore, I think it's sad that this has come to the Cabinet halfway through a part-heard hearing of the licensing panel. It would have been much better if this had come at the beginning of the process and the consultation process than in the position it finds itself. Having made those comments, as far as I'm concerned, I support the event, but that would be subject to them being able to secure a licence.
Can I just then wind this up unless anybody wants to speak? I think the point about the licensing conditions is actually made in the report in under 4.7. The permission that we are giving today, if you agree this item, is that we support the event, but actually allow it to take place subject to them meeting the various conditions that they have, including the licence. Now, it's a chicken and egg situation. It's very easy to blame officers, I think, for bringing things, as it's been termed, late. But actually, it's a question of when you get your ducks in a row. If you simply go with a sort of vague idea that you'd like to do this, and you know, you really haven't got all your consultation done, then the first reaction is to see the flaws in all of this. And I think that actually what they've done is to talk to the committee. They've formed a safety group, and they're working their way through those issues. And I think they've actually approached this in a very professional way. Having said that, I accept that others may have a different point of view. But I'm very happy with this proposal. I hope it will go ahead, and I hope that any concerns that the licensing or other authorities have can properly be accommodated. But I do hope that that is done in a positive way, because I think that we ought to encourage events like this. And what we don't want to do, obviously, is to put up a sign which more or less says you can't put on a large event in Medway like this because they're just too darn difficult. And I don't think that's... I think what we've got to do is to welcome these type of events, welcome the enjoyment they give to hundreds and thousands of people. And I think that, you know, to be positive about these, I want to see these festivals grow, and I want to see, frankly, in a time when we're in the middle of a recession, to have events like this, I think is really, you know, something to sort of, how can I put it, perhaps cheer everyone up and give them some days out here. And I think that, you know, they are very positive in their impact, and I do support them for those reasons. Can I therefore ask whether you are willing to support the recommendations which are in section 10, to approve the hire of the Great Lines Heritage Park to host the 4 days of the Great Lines Great Music Weekend Festival over the late May Bank holiday in 2023, and the Cabinet is asked to instruct officers to ensure, and this is the point that was made earlier, the organisers agree to meet the terms and conditions of the location hire agreement as set out in paragraph 4.7. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll now go on to the Council Plan Performance Monitoring. I'm not warning it all out. And this is one that Adrian will present.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Yes. Overall, I must say that performance over the Q3 is somewhat disappointing. However, where improvement is needed, there are robust plans in place for this, as can be seen in the comments section of the appendices. Having said that, there are lots of very good progress contained in this report, and I'm sure colleagues will wish to highlight those in their areas of responsibility. In my own areas, it's good to see on pages 246 and 247 of the supplementary agenda a long list of activities carried out by the Medway Task Force to keep Medway's community safe. The task force has been very successful in bidding for several £100,000 of safer streets funding. This has enabled extra work to be done to prevent violence against women and girls and to fund a post to deal with illicit tobacco, working with our trading standards officers. On page 224, this highlights the work done by the capital projects team and property teams in progressing the regeneration of Chatham as our city centre, with projects in the Pennington Centre, the former Debenham site, the Brook Theatre, public realm improvements of the Padlet, and assisting the Diocese of Rochester in bringing the St John's Church back into use, both as a public place of public worship and to community use. Deputy Leader, I'd like to hand over now to Councillor Hatwell, who would like to comment on the risk register for Q3.
Councillor Hackwell. No, your light's not on.
I'll use mine.
That's it.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I have very little to say on the risk register, as there's been no change since the last time we reviewed it. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to say anything? Do you wish to? I'd just like to remind you, one of the good things I think that has happened here is we've now got the figures for the Dickens Festival at Christmas and the Christmas market. And we attracted an audience of some 245,000 people, which brings me back to the theme of my previous item, that we can ensure that there are large events that run off successfully in Medway. And I think that it is a growing thing, and I think something that the public appreciates. So I do congratulate officers on the organisation of that event, and indeed on all the work they do with us to actually make sure that we agree so many of the targets within this plan and reach those targets. Naturally enough, you won't obviously have achieved them all, but if we did, we got the wrong targets because they should be aspirational. But I think at the end of the day, we meet a quite surprising number, and I think that that is due really to the hard work and the leadership shown by the senior officers in this council. Thank you very much. Now move on to the contract procedure rules, which I think, Gary, you're going to enlighten us about. No? Adrian, okay.
Actually,
sorry.
Deputy Leader, I didn't actually move the recommendation for the last item, so could I quickly do that? I'd like to move the recommendations at 7 on page 209 of the supplementary agenda.
Yes, so quite right.
That's namely that Cabinet is asked to note the Q3 2022-23 performance against the measures used to monitor progress against the Council's priorities. 7.2, the Cabinet is asked to agree the strategic risk summary as set out in Appendix 4 to the report.
Oh, thank you very much. Must be getting
Now
tired.
happy to
Sorry.
go on to the...
Right, we're now going on to contract procedure rules. Do you want
Right.
to lead on that? Or
Yes, happy to proceed on that. Thank you, Deputy Leader. It's been some time since the contract procedure rules have been updated. Since this was last done in 2018, the threshold for reports to be presented to the Procurement Board have in fact become much lower due to inflation. The new proposed thresholds are to be found at paragraph 3.32. Other changes can be seen in paragraphs 10.2 of the report. I'd like to thank the Audit and Business Support ONS committees for their comments. Though I must confess, Deputy Leader, I was a little confused as to how DBS checks got involved with procurement. Not that one would object to all members having DBS checks done. I think that would be a good thing, but as I wasn't at the Business Support ONS committee, I'm not quite sure how that got to be tacked on to this. Deputy Leader, I'd like to move the recommendation 11 on page 203 of the supplementary agenda. So move.
Anyone else wish to speak? Well, I'll bring Councillor Hackwell in next if he's patiently waited there.
I'm just happy to support this. I think that you know, contract management does need to be updating. You can see by the amount that we're putting the limits up by, it is sadly has not been updated for a long time and actually is genuinely in need of a refresh. So happy to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Brake.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and in support of the paper that we have in front of us, I'm pleased to support also. I'd just like to point out that the work that was undertaken to arrive at where we are now, in fact, as is outlined in the report, was in fact a cross-party arrangement where Councillor Colvin and myself, who are both members of the Procurement Board, together with Councillor Edwards, representing the Labour group, we were there and we examined all of the necessary areas to ensure that we all agreed with the proposals that were coming through. And I'd just like to take the opportunity of congratulating the procurement team for their hard work that they have done, and believe me, they don't just come along with their ideas, drop them in front of us, do a 2-minute presentation and walk away. They're subjected to a great deal of review and scrutiny at each and every item to make sure that the Medway Council money, in fact, is being spent wisely and properly for the benefit of Medway community. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Is there anything you wish further to say, Councillor Colvin?
No, I'd like to thank Councillor Hatwell and Councillor Brake for the comments, and Councillor Brake is absolutely correct. The Procurement Board give quite severe scrutiny at times to the officers' reports, and I think it's the credit of our officers that they respond well to such robust questioning. So happy to move the recommendations at 11.1 A and B, so that to note the comments of the Audit Committee are set out in section 5 of the report, and the comments of the Business Support and Overview and Scrutiny Committees as set out in the addendum report, and recommend to full council to approve the revised contract procedure are all set out as appendix 2 of the report. So move, Lee.
Are you all agreed with those recommendations? Thank you very much. We'll now move on, please, to Gateway 1 procurement commencement and supported bus contracts for 2023. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. This report seeks permission to commence the procurement of the supported buses and the MY yellow bus contracts to go out to procurement, looking for expressions of interest for a contract that will start in September. So the recommendation is at 9.1. I so move.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased to see that the Council is continuing to commit to the MY bus service. It's extremely popular. It's taken a hell of a lot of cars off the road where we're transporting these children to school. So great to see that continuing with this procurement process. And also just on a separate matter to say thank you to the Integrated Transport team for engaging with me and interested residents on the issue of cleaner buses. And I hope that we will through this procurement process and through other avenues, continue to work with contractors over providing the best and the cleanest buses for Medway.
Anyone else? Do you wish to speak again?
No, thank you, Councillor Potter, for your remarks, and I so move.
Do you all agree the recommendation, section 9? Thank you. And we now have the South Thames, item 22, the South Thames Gateway Building Control Partnership Business Plan. Councillor Chitty.
Yes, I draw members' attention to the recommendations and the financial implications of that and the commitment to it. Can I say that not very often do South Thames Gateway Building Control get the recognition that they actually deserve. Very hard working and dedicated group of people. I'm very proud to say that I was part of the formation of putting this partnership together and working with other authorities, I think it would be quite clear to say that a great deal of money has been saved in relation to the running of this particular organisation.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, and I'll bring you in next.
I'd like to support what Mrs Chitty has said, and I think this is yet another example of the Medway Council continuing policy as working in partnership with different groups and organisations to the benefit of Medway, not only to the council but to the community at large. This partnership delivers an exemplary service, and I think it's worth people looking into the history of it and why it was formed, because it was formed at a time when there was deregulation for building control, and it had to then, and the local authorities decided that they still wished to retain a service, but of course each one couldn't maintain the service at the level at that time after deregulation, and therefore we came up with the idea through the Thames Gateway Kent partnership, and that's how the idea first started, for the creation of the South Thames Gateway building control. I think it is worth, perhaps Mrs Chitty can say which local authorities we're in partnership with, and that I do know that it has been extremely successful. I would say that, wouldn't I, because I was one of the instigators of the creation of it and the appointment of Mrs Chitty to lead it. But it has been successful, it continues to be successful, and it is an organisation in its building control function which is not, if you like, sympathetic to one element of the development community or the other. It plays a straight bat and it gives honest opinions, and it is not doesn't come back in really putting the big stick in when it sees contravention to development and building control, which some developers like to sort of, and I'm not looking at Councillor Filmer over there because I know he a very honourable man and company, but they're not averse in being critical, but they are also very willing to give plaudits as to good practice where they find it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the partners are listed actually in 5.2. This is Canterbury, Gravesham and Swale. Sorry, Councillor Galvin.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. I'd just like to say I'm pleased to say that the Medway Development Company have used STG for our building control, and talking to our Chief Operating Officer a few days ago, he was certainly singing STG's praises as to the way that they've worked very, very closely with MDC, been very cooperative, very helpful. I think the best way to describe, they've been firm but fair, and they, you know, he reached out to me very clearly that he felt that they had done a really good job.
Councillor Filmer, you want to say a few words, I think? Yeah.
Just in reply to Councillor Chambers, yes, we use STG, and they are very professional. And as you say, straight back, no problems. I wish I could say the same about the National House Builders, but STG, very good.
Okay. Then in that case, then do you all accept the recommendation in section 7? Do you want to say anything further by closing? Oh, right, okay. Do that before we take the recommendation then.
Can I thank members for their comments? I would point out that some of the work that is undertaken is not paid for, which is a very serious issue. It's usually in terms of historic buildings and emergencies, so that should be taken into account. I'd like, if I might, add on that part of this recommendation we can send our thanks to the organisation for the work they've done, also for the work they did during the pandemic. And I think that that would mean a great deal to those people that work within the organisation.
Okay, thank you. And I'll put that recommendation to you, which is contained in section 7. Are you all in favour?
Thank you.